to take a stroll out west today via Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's an Epiphone FT30, the Caballero, or Caballero. Not Guy Caballero, the president and owner of SCTV. This is a Gibson-made student model guitar that corresponds to the Gibson LG series model 0, or O. Most of us will know that after Gibson acquired the Epiphone brand in 1956, they moved production from Queens, New York to Kalamazoo, Michigan. And for the next 15 or so years, they did a very strange thing. When Gibson designed a new guitar, they would often, but not always, make a similar model to be sold under the Epiphone banner. They'd be almost identical except for maybe the headstock shape and the label, and they were made in the same factory. I suppose it was some kind of attempt at vertical monopoly, give the people a surplus of choices, but all of the money goes to the exact same place, that's pretty good. So you could buy a J45, or if you wanted to be a little rebel, you could have a Texan. They really went hard on the country and western idea too. And there were some models that were distinctly Epiphone creations, but there is a lot of crossover. So if this is supposed to duplicate the LGO, or LG0, what was that guitar? Well, it's an all-mahogany budget model that Gibson introduced in 1958 to go along with their LGs 1, 2, and 3. 2 and 3 having spruce tops, X-bracing. Those have been in production since the mid-40s. It's a small, compact, ladder-braced, inexpensive, not too far removed from a campfire guitar. So it might be a little strange to make a redundant second line of inexpensive budget guitars, but they did. The Caballero has binding on the front of the body only, to save a few bucks. And in this case, it's not too bad. I've seen some that have really rotted away due to that funky bad celluloid thing. It can be difficult to date these guitars precisely. The serial numbers don't, well, there's a lot of duplication and they don't really add up if you punch them into some of the serial number trackers. I know that this guitar is 1965 or later based on the neck width. It has that classic late 60s Gibson skinny neck. Originally, too, it would have had a plastic bridge, it seems. This is a replacement, which suggests 1965, 1966. That bridge has been replaced with a rosewood one, and I think at some point the replacement has been planed down in an effort to lower the action. The owner would like to see if it can be lowered even more. You can see how much of the shafts of the bridge pins are exposed here. This can happen when you plane down a bridge, as you're basically planing off the wide part of the taper to the holes, so they can't go in full depth anymore. This has got the long, full-sized Epiphone open-booked headstock, and some replacement tuners. These have got barrel shafts, like Ping or something. Fairly old, but not great. We have some replacements to put in there. It's nice that all the bushings are still in there. Oftentimes they go missing. The frets are in good shape. Not too much wear. The nut slots, actually, are a bit high in some cases. A little room there that we can use to make it feel easier to play by lowering them down. There's no major damage anywhere else. It's in reasonable shape. The owner wants me to put a K&K pickup into it, which can be a little bit confounding to install sometimes in a ladder brace guitar, depending on the design. You have to find a place to put it. The action is not too terribly bad. It's about 6 1/2 64ths, which is about 100 thousandths, which is about 2.5 millimeters, which is, on the verge of comfortable, and slightly less on the treble side. The neck is reasonably straight too. The relief is around 7 thousandths. The owner's going to do some finger picking on this, and he would like the action, below 6 would be good. looking at the bridge, there's a little way to come down. I might be able to get a 1/2/64 out of it. To do that, we're almost certainly going to have to extend the little ramps for the string from the bridge pin holes. We're going to move that forward to give a bit better break angle. I also have to look at the bridge pad, which he believes is kind of messed up. Pop these bridge pins out. More evidence that this bridge was planed down. You can see the center section is darker and less oxidized than the wings. And also the line of the wings has taken on a strange curved shape, which happens when you're planing sometimes. We'll have a look inside. We see the simple pattern of transverse braces, where we get the name ladder bracing from, and a bridge pad with a whole lot of chewed up area between the pinholes. The pad looks a little dark in this picture, but I believe it's actually spruce, like Sitka spruce, and softwood doesn't really hold up that well to string changes, unfortunately. Let's use a sanding block in there to clean up that surface. Just cleaning the surface with some naphtha, get the dust off. Bit of a conundrum. What do you do in a case like this? Because this bridge pad is so big, and it's bordered on either side by braces pretty tightly. So it's not the easiest thing to remove. Ordinarily I'd have to come under the braces on both sides to get into the center of the bridge pad. We're lucky that it's spruce rather than the plywood pads that were also in use at this time, because it's a little thinner. It's maybe, I guess, about 4 millimeters, whereas the plywood can be up to like 1/4 of an inch thick. Real kind of beastly tone suck. And I think the lighter wood here actually is going to be acoustically active enough that we can put the K&K dots under the saddle. In other instances, you know, I felt better putting them back here actually, past the brace. But, you know, I think the thing to do is what the cool kids are using on these ultra expensive Martin guitars and such. They're doing a cast resin epoxy in the area. Just block off the underside of the pad and then pour epoxy through here to make a casting and then re-drill the holes. That's a good way, rather than do the bridge plate overlay, because I don't really want to add extra thickness in this case. It's just not necessary. This is some of that ultra low tax sign maker's tape. Let's put a little back here around the area where I'm going to be using the epoxy. Double layer of painter's tape, which I will take great pains to put in the right area. This is a 5-minute epoxy from System 3. I kind of want the fast cure time, and it's a bit thicker than some casting epoxies, but it's fine. It pours nicely, and I think it'll do a good job. It cures pretty hard. Here's what it looked like after the tape came off. This has to cure for, well, at least a day and probably more than that before it gets truly hard and I feel safe drilling through it. But this is certainly harder and more resilient than the surrounding spruce ever was. Okay, got some Clouson Deluxe. These happen to be single line Clousons. Should look a little more appropriate, I think. I'm going to reposition this cute little strap button to the neck side. I'll take a measurement here of the screw thread diameter and figure out what kind of pilot hole I want. This seems to be just over 140 thousandths. I could probably get away with 1/8, 125 thousandths. 3 millimeters is probably what I want. Poke a little hole where I want it to go. Okay, this should not feel super tight. If it does, you're in danger of cracking the heel. I mean, it should be snug, but not, you shouldn't have to force it in. Having screwed it in, I'll back it out there. I'm going to saturate the inside of that hole with some super glue, thin super glue, to basically consolidate the wood in that area and make it a little bit more resilient. And we're going directly into end grain in this area. And there we are. I'll let that cure before I put the screw back in. I need to enlarge this hole for the jack. That's commonly drilled out with a 1/2-inch drill bit. To my mind, that is a little bit too loose. I'd much prefer 12mm or 31/64. That seems like the right diameter to me. However, I do like to use a step bit to start it off here, and I will drill up to the 1/2-inch increment, which will give me a nice clean place to put my drill of the appropriate diameter. There's a hole that's not too loose and not too snug. It looks to me like these frets have been dressed and recrowned. You can see remnants of string wear, but they've been pushed in towards the center. In Japan, this activity is called siedashi. Siedashi. I'll drill through the epoxy with my 3/16" bit to re-establish the pinholes and ream them to fit. I'll use a square to plot lines for the string ramps, bisecting each of the pinholes, pushing it towards the saddle slot. Then I'll use my Dremel tool with a carbide bit, and these are not all the way through the soundboard. They're ramps. They go downwards towards the hole, and they just direct the string. This is not like the kind of pinhole we would use for, say, an unslotted bridge pin, which goes all the way down through the soundboard. This is just a ramp. I happen to have a homemade positioning device for installing the K&K pickup dots that matches the string spread on this guitar. This just guides my finger into the right position rather than using the plastic device that comes with the pickup. I find this a little quicker and easier. I'll feed the jack through the end block and secure it in place. To install the 3 little transducers, I protect my fingy with a finger from a rubber glove and apply a dot of gel super glue. Then I reach in and fit the dot into the corresponding detent in my jig and hold it in place for a minute. The saddle's radius is a little bit irregular. I'm going to change this to a 16-inch radius, which works better if you have the treble E a 64th of an inch lower than the bass E. So I'll actually be working on the top surface this time. I'll true that up to an accurate radius and dial in the dimensions. And that, friends, is as low as it goes. It's about a 1/16 of an inch above the top surface of the bridge. Before I stick my vacuum hose into the guitar to clean up the drill swarf, I want to glue this loose edge of the label down. These things have a way of tearing when exposed to vacuums. Now's a good time to correct the nut slot depth. This will make things easier to play and also improve the tuning when it comes to first position chords. As so often happens when we lower the action, we discover the bump where the neck and the body meet is causing a bunch of dead notes. Like so many of its Gibson brethren, this guitar has a rising tongue, where the frets over the body are not in line with the rest of the neck proper, so I have to go ahead and plane some fall away into those, and recrown those, and polish them. Alright, set to go. The action is now just over 5/64 on the bass side, 4.5 on the treble, which is fantastic. That's lower than factory, I'm certain. It's also the last setup it'll have before it needs a neck reset, because there is no more room to lower the saddle. Although that shouldn't be for some time now, of course, because the action should be this way for years to come. These guitars represent the last group of instruments from Gibson's vintage Kalamazoo era that are still kind of affordable. Their counterparts, the LG series, those are taking off. You know, they've basically tripled in value in the last dozen years or so. These are not in that same class yet. And of course, they'll never be worth what a Hummingbird or a J45 is. But they've got a certain kind of charm. I find the narrow nut width on this is too narrow for my comfort, but it'll be just fine for a lot of players. It has a very characteristic ladder brace tone, and it's just the thing for some nasty blues.